So would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Yes, absolutely. My name's Tim Benson. I am an oil painter. I specialize in portraits, but I wouldn't call myself a portrait painter per se. I paint anything. I have been doing this since I left art school back in 2001, so quite a long time now. I am the ex-president of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters. That's right. I'm a member of the Royal Society of Portrait Painters and the New English Art Club. Yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Great, cool. Um, I was looking for your Instagram beforehand, and I thought this would be an interesting thing to start off with. You said something, so you post your portraits, and they get loads of likes and loads of engagement. You post a landscape, and it's kind of sort of tumbleweed a little bit.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I'm a landscape painter. People mainly know me for my landscapes, and whenever I paint a still life, post a still life painting, I get the same kind of tumbleweed thing. How much do you think sort of the algorithmic thing now relates to artistic identity? What we put out and the recognizability of an artist. Do you think it affects it in some way?
Well, listen, it's difficult to quantify, isn't it?
Mm.
I don't have access to the machinery that determines the algorithms, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't understand it. But all I can say is that I can speak from personal experience and say that certainly across the board, I don't know exactly when it was that it changed, but certainly I used to get a lot more oxygen, a lot more interaction with all of my posts, both portraits and landscapes, than I do now. But I still get more interaction for my portrait work. Now I can only discern that that's something to do with the painting of the human form. And some pseudo intelligent bot picking up on that and saying, well, that painting, that's a person, people like people, will show that, as opposed to a landscape which doesn't do that. So yeah, I think that it's undeniable that what you put out there is certainly picked up on and treated in a different way to something else.
Mm. That's interesting. Um, do you find yourself what you create being nowadays sort of tailored to a social media audience? Is it part of the thing, or you just carry on doing what you're doing?
I'm sort of basically, just sort of blindly carrying on with what I'm doing. I'm not. Listen, I was around before social media. You were around before social media. I'm not going to be dictated to by a series of bots in Silicon Valley. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just not going to cut it. I won't be happy, and the work would be rubbish. It would just, for me
Yeah.
personally, it wouldn't work. So no, I'm carrying on regardless. And listen, I'm not complaining. At the end of the day, I'm in a good position in terms of where I am, what I'm doing. It's all relative. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But I still get a platform to show my work, and people still do interact with it. And I'm not going to sort of reinvent the wheel to try and create some sort of fictitious panacea whereby I paint something that Instagram ratifies and puts up there. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. I think what nowadays what is interesting about Instagram and about the development of art in many ways since modernism, where figurative art in the late 20th century was sort of seen as uncool or whatever. But nowadays, and especially with the internet and social media, that many different forms of art can coexist in many ways. It's postmodern in that sense that you have all of those different strands, and people can find or engage with what they're interested in. And it is in many ways a little sort of renaissance, I think, for visual arts,
Yeah.
the internet. That
Definitely. I mean,
yeah,
I think I think that it is. Sorry to jump in. I mean, I think
No, absolutely.
certainly, social media, for all its negative points, it is a democratizing platform. It allows people who wouldn't otherwise have a pedestal, a platform to show their work because of social trends, or the sort of nuances of the art world, to actually do that, and for people sort of to come in and see it, and to find it, which I think is fantastic. What I don't, and a little bit more worried about, is that it is then potentially dictating to people what it is, what it isn't they shouldn't be looking at. And I think that that's a dangerous game where it loses its democracy, its democratic element, its the basis of its existence, and becomes more, well, political, I suppose, would be an extreme way of putting it. But that's stylish.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's sort of, who's curating it in that sense, choosing,
exactly.
Algorithmic system in Silicon Valley deciding.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did, and I've got no, it's not a basis of any particular knowledge. I've got no idea, but I suspect that they're not necessarily, particularly up on art.
Yeah.
I mean, and, I think you can then sort of extrapolate that and look at something like Twitter, or sorry, X. What's happened there. I still do use Twitter, but it's a very different animal to what it used to be. I mean, I think it used to have if a social media platform can be seen as, have an integrity to it, I think that that's been rather lost. I shan't name any names or anything like that. But so if there is a king or queen maker behind the scenes, then I think that it loses its, it's the whole point of the platform. It loses its legitimacy and its power.
Absolutely.
Actually, that's happening with Instagram as well. I don't know.
Yeah. You were the RVX president of the Royal Institute of Oil Painters.
Correct. Yes.
And just keeping it on that thing about sort of standards and institutions, how important do you think they still are today, in that sense, with the democratization of art across the board? Do they still have the same weight?
No. No, they don't, because there are so many, as I've already said, there are so many outlets for disseminating what you do, for showing work, and for people, judging it. And there are far more competitions, there are far more, virtual galleries. So it's not that you're having to sort of corral a smaller number of people into one or two, galleries or venues like you would in the past. There would only probably be, I don't know, in like late 19th century, 4 or 5 or 6 outlets that were societally considered to be, to be up there. Whereas now, I couldn't begin to count how many avenues there are for showing your work, which I think is a really good thing. Just because I was involved, well, I still am involved, but just because I was heavily involved in that side of things, it doesn't mean that I don't see the merit in looking at things through a different lens. And societies, the nature of societies, it's incumbent on them to react to the change in social mores, in trends, and to grow and expand and democratize and be relevant. That's absolutely crucial. And without that, then you become extinct.
Yeah. Very interesting. Simon, do you have a question?
Always, yeah. I mean, I'm always impressed with the discourse that you have with your audience, because of how you use the platform to raise certain subjects that are either got growing pains or something which you've noticed that people are trying to adapt to in some way or other. Is there anything which you're thinking about at the moment as a subject, or is that not how these come up? I mean, how spontaneous are you with discussing certain topics on your Instagram?
Well, I mean, I think that when we're dealing with subject matter, I'm not quite with you on this one, Simon. I've got to say, but if I'm understanding you the way I think I'm understanding you, the subject matter is not as there's nothing that's off limits for me to talk about. Okay, I do think that it's there's a lot of sort of skullduggery at play. I think in the art world, a lot of sort of smoke and shadows and people not necessarily talking honestly and people being quite guarded about what they do and the mechanisms involved in how things are done. It's quite opaque a lot of the time, and I do think that transparency across the board is of paramount importance. And I think that art should be democratic. I do also think it should be qualitative as well. I think that it should be well done. But I do think that the more people that have a chance to do that that's just a really, really good thing. So I'm very happy to talk about that sort of stuff, whether it be in my Instagram posts or right now. Is that what you were getting at? Or were you talking about more my own personal projects and how I choose them?
I suppose that was, I mean, what I'm thinking is that I was made aware of you when you raised the issue of representational art being prevalent in galleries or not so much these days, with modern art being something that you see more commonly embraced in certain art circles to an extent. And that was an interesting discussion, which I went into your comment section about. And that's when I reached out to you initially. And then since then, I've seen you do the same thing with other issues, which I just think you've got this real, a really considerate tone to discuss issues with artists on the platform. And I'm trying to consider, how would I introduce that if I were to have a larger audience? And I think I would have a pause about me before I actually launch this, thinking, have I considered everything yet? And I don't know, because you're very confident in everything that you do, which I really admire, in the way that you've got a certainty about what you do because you know who you are, which I think comes across really nicely in the way that you describe your approach to art making and your view on lots of aspects of art. That's something which I think I have a bit more hesitance with sometimes, when I'm thinking, if I've not considered this fairly, it will come back at me tenfold, so.
And I mean, it invariably it does on some level. I mean, there's always going to be somebody who thinks something else, or who doesn't agree with you, and that I think is no bad thing. You shouldn't have sort of a monopoly on opinion. I think that's sort of be in any way sort of dictatorial in what you say. If you're going to, you do put yourself in range of people if you go out and say to however many people, 60,000 people, that this is what I think. But I do think that I do have thoughts, and Instagram, it's social media. It's not just about posting pictures. You can use it for whatever you want to use it for. And I think that to engender and encourage debate, to talk about things that are perhaps seen as slightly risky or slightly off limits, I think is perfectly reasonable. On the understanding that you do leave yourself open to a difference of opinion, and at the end of the day, it's just that. And I think if it's done in the right way with the right intent, ergo, doing it because you want your people's experience to be better than it otherwise is, including my own, I benefit from it as well, then I think that that's worth the risk. And as I've said before, Simon, life is short, and I've spent a lot of time, certainly earlier on in my career, not saying things or not articulating how I'm feeling about certain things for fear of reprisal or for putting people's noses out of joint. And well, yeah, I don't want to upset people unduly. There's no honor in that. But equally, I don't think that things should be off limits or off the table for fear of what people might think. Within reason, you don't want to, become horrible and offend people.
No.
And your knowledge, I mean, it comes from experience. And I think that's where it is an important element of what you do. But
And they are. Sorry to interrupt. They are just observations. That's all they are. There's no sort of absolutes in what I'm saying. It's like this is right, this is wrong. It's like I think there was one post I did about, well, my experience, is it just me, or has the art market rather tanked this year because I haven't sold anything? And because the thing is, we're relatively isolated in what we do. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And I put it out there, expecting maybe a couple of people to say, yeah, it's been a bit rough, or many people saying it's fine. And I had this absolutely tumultuous response of people saying, oh my God, thank God, thank God it's not just me. And then them saying, oh, I'm sorry that you're having a hard time as well, which is very sweet. But, I think it's a democratizing thing. And I think sometimes it gives people a context. And, you're not alone. You're not alone. We're all in this together. And I think that is empowering.
And it's interesting you're saying about that, because I've had that conversation as well about the art market, especially this year, because often, everybody's maybe thinking think it's just them that's suffering, right? So when someone does sort of burst that bubble, in a sense, and start talking, so let's shift to that, the art market. So what do you think is going on? Is it just been this year in particular? How was last year?
Again, listen, I mean, everything I say is born out of my own personal experience. Not a sort of oversight of what's going on, or a deep understanding of the economics involved. But I think, well, what my experience was that, sort of bibbling along okay last year. It was all right. People weren't bashing the walls down trying to get my paintings. It's never kind of been like that, really. I'm not one of these artists that, just has these I'm not massively commercial in what I do, I suppose, or the way I do it. So it's a relatively sort of small demographic it's going to appeal to. That being said, there was a steady trickle of sales, which, kept me in bread. And then suddenly that was turned off overnight. I went away at the beginning of January, came back, and that was it. It was gone.
Yeah.
And I couldn't give stuff away, it was just like, it was really quite catastrophic because, and I'm sure that I'm speaking to many, many people here who experienced a similar thing. My bills did not stop, but my revenue stream did, and things got really, really, really hairy. And they're still not great by any means, but it's a little bit better now. But yeah, the first 6 months, 7 months of this year, I've never had anything like that in my entire career. I've been through a recession before, and it wasn't great, but this was just nothing, literally not a sale. Yeah. So, and the problem is that it doesn't matter how, sort of self-assured you are or experienced you are, you do look at yourself and you look at your model and you look at your prices and you think, am I too expensive? And the reality is, in that moment, yeah, you are, because people aren't buying. But it then brings up a lot of different questions about how you respond to it, how you react to it, and and of course you want to play a long game and sort of ride the misery and come out the other side. But the reality is, actually, there isn't necessarily a long game to play, because you've got to survive. So you do have to, you go into battle mode and change your model slightly.
So how do you diversify? So I'll say a little bit about myself. So I teach workshops. I do various types of things to basically pay the rents, pay the car, pay the studio, things like that. So there's always that foundation. Then with the painting sales, they're always up and down. Sometimes it's brilliant, sometimes it's not. And when it's brilliant, I don't get too excited. And when it's shit, I try not to get too the opposite of excited. But it's, like you say, it's that kind of long game. And I think artists nowadays, and speaking back to how things have changed, that diversification of income stream and business model it's something you kind of have to be aware of all of the time, because it's never a stable linear type platform. There are always these sort of bumps in the road. So how did you adjust to it did you start?
Well, I'd rather sort of. It was all very bad timing for me because I'd rather sort of burn my boats a little bit. I used to, well, I still do a certain amount, not much, but I do teach and lecture at art schools, but not much. I don't want to, as much as I enjoy it, I don't want to do too much of it.
Yeah,
that's the balance I want to maintain. But I'd actually, when various institutions had said, oh, can we book you for a slot, next term or whatever? And I was saying, actually, I'm scaling back on that. So just ahead of this crash, I'll be like, I'm not taking the work. And in a way, that was liberating because I was like, actually, I'm okay. I'm not going to do that. And then obviously this happened. I was like, Jesus, that's just typical, isn't it? But of course, they'd quite understandably given the work to other people, as they should.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do that. So I had to change things up. And one thing that I did, which I have never done before, and I do not want to do again, is to reduce prices of my work. And that was a decision that was hard to make, really, really, really difficult to make, and ultimately not one that in any way has benefited me because it didn't sell. Even though the prices were lower, the work did not sell. And then you've done damage to, and I don't want to sound too corporate about this, but 22 years of building up your brand. And I knew that at the time. But there are plenty of ways of sort of putting it and articulating it to people, like this is a studio sale or blah blah. But ultimately, it amounts to the same thing. And then I was like, what? Actually, sod it. I'd rather have 100% of nothing than, well, this isn't a great analogy, but 100% of 50%, and you're 60%. Do you know what I mean? It's like I might as well just put my prices back up. People aren't buying anyway, so sod it. I might as well maintain my brand. And I think that that's absolutely vital. I really do. And yes, I think I have done myself some damage, but I don't think it's irreparable. And it didn't go on for long enough for it to become the market, I suppose. And the market will recover. And I, as I say, I wasn't at a lower price point for so long that I will be pigeonholed by that or associated with that. But no, the reality is Richard, I haven't actually really adequately made provision. I've just sort of battened down the hatches. I've just tightened the purse strings a bit, and we just done what our incredibly illustrious, all-knowing government have said, and gone and bought the cheaper food at the supermarket. And they know a thing or two, those guys.
Yeah. So going back to those sort of teaching opportunities and things you were talking about, the difficulty is with those that they're kind of arranged sometimes a year, 6 months, like in advance, right? So you say, yes, I'll be able to do it. So, and I've had it this week where a couple of things have popped up, and I'm just like, oh, I forgot about that. I arranged that 6-8 months ago or something. Now, often when things are good and you're busy with lots of other stuff, you don't you say, I'm not going to do those for now, for all of the reasons you explained. We talked to Daniel Shadbolt in the last episode, and I was saying about this balance between teaching and practice. If you end up leaning too much into teaching, you end up losing out on your own practice. And many of my lecturers at university were full-time lecturers, and the work they were showing was 10, 15 years old. So when times are good and we're busy and optimistic, you sort of say no to all of these opportunities. And then 6 months down the line, there's that dip and kind of wish you had. So I think it shows that example of being a working artist, that it is, you've got to think about a lot of things all at the same time. And some things can be, you can make a decision on now. Some things you have to wait a little bit. It's quite confusing.
It is, and I think that you want to, in a sense, if you want to future-proof yourself by
Mm.
saying, yes, I will do this in a year's time because that's going to give me much, much needed, well, possibly much needed income. But conversely, you're thinking, well, I don't want to say yes because I have this sort of imaginary situation where I don't need to, where I'm going to have sold everything and it's just going to be a different kettle of fish, or the market's just going to be unbelievably buoyant. It's going to be yuppies with big mobiles again buying paintings. And it's a balance, isn't it? And it's very mood dependent as well. And it's all bound in with your own identity of what you're doing and what you are and who you are. And yeah, it's a very complex beast. And I think a lot of people are in a similar, a similar situation. But yeah, I mean, I can give you an example. I used to be, there's an art school down in Chelsea, a private art school, or actually one of the oldest art schools in the UK, called Heatherley's, and it's an atelier style place, working predominantly from the model, but not exclusively. And I was the head of portraiture there for, I think it was 3 years. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big proponent of that place, and good people and good skills, and I like it. But it came to a point where I was just working too much, going to meetings and meetings about meetings, and I was like, you know what? Come on. I've always said to myself, if I spend more time doing that than painting, then that balance has become skewed, and I had to address that. So yeah, I was very aware that I could be in a situation before I knew it where I was not really painting and bound in by the monthly paycheck, basically, the security. Mm-hmm. Which is not why I'm doing this ultimately. Yes, of course, I want to be financially secure, but I didn't sign up to be an artist for that. That's not what I'm doing.
Interesting. And back to sales and stuff like that. So you do mainly commissions, is that right?
Not really.
Yeah.
It's hard. You know what? I really struggle to describe to people where my money comes from or what the bulk of what I do is. I would say it's a real mix. As I've already mentioned, I am not a big commission painter, portrait painter, especially because, I'm not in the business of nice painting. It's not what I do. I don't airbrush. I'm not going to make you look any younger than you actually are. Probably the opposite. And so there's a limited demographic who want that. Okay, they're paintings before they're portraits, if you know what I mean, or at least I hope they are. So I wouldn't say that I get a huge amount of commissions. However, the commissions I do get, they're generally from people who really identify with the work that I'm doing and the sort of work that I'm doing. So they tend to be really good commissions. They're mutually nourishing experiences. But no, it tends to be the majority, or certainly the majority of the last few years, is actual piece, sort of what I call fine art pieces of portrait painting, as in people buying paintings of people they don't know, which for me is a lovely thing, right? Because normally when people buy a picture of somebody, it's because they know them or they've commissioned it. But for them to say, actually, that is an emotive piece of art that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know the person. I think, that's for me a real compliment, actually. So I do sell some of those, but again, recently it's been really tough. And I do sell landscapes, but again, it's been tough. I think that the more known I become for painting people, the more the balance has shifted towards me actually selling paintings of people rather than which is interesting because obviously landscapes are inherently more commercial. But this is all in between my bigger projects where I have a thematic element to a big body of work that's normally associated with a humanitarian issue. I'm setting up my next project at the moment, and that's going to be in motion pretty soon, and that's been quite a big undertaking. And I've not done one of these really since 2018-19, and the birth of my 1920, the birth of my first son, and then my second son, COVID, a war, Brexit, all of these things all at once equals, not a huge amount of headspace or cognitive ability, and also just a sort of a very cautious climate generally. Now I think things are, well, certainly my own cognitive abilities have improved. Whether or not the climate is less cautious, I don't know. In fact, it's a bit of, the world is a flame at the moment, actually. But
do you mind sharing what that project's going to be?
well, because the world is a flame, it's a climate change based project, and I'm sort of kind of crossing the T's and dotting the I's with various collaborators at the moment. But it's basically the impact on people in low-lying regions of the planet due to rising sea levels, and ultimately how that actually is going to impact the UK as well. It's a metaphor, isn't it? They are the ones that are, getting it now, but the reality is this is coming here as well, and we're all part of it, and we're all complicit. And this is so it's awareness building. So through portraits, audio, probably video, it's going to be sort of multi-format exhibit. I don't see it being a commercial exhibit in the sense that it's not going to be a commercial selling gallery space. That's not how I want this to be. It's more of a sort of awareness building museum style thing that hopefully will get some funding.
Yeah,
that's the model. But obviously there are a lot of working parts in this, and each one is sort of, the success of one is contingent on the other one happening. So it's like a house of cards. If one thing flips, then the whole thing falls apart. So it's engaging all of my cognitive abilities and skills way beyond painting, because I haven't done any painting yet. That's the easy bit. I mean, I don't want to sound flippant. It's never easy, obviously, but that's at least I have a direct a direct influence on the outcome of that. Whereas dealing with this, there are a lot of things at play that are at play that I can't influence. Politics, and it may not be the right fit for certain organisations, stuff like that. So we shall see. But that's going to be coming to life hopefully within the next few months.
It's fascinating. Will you also have time to sort of do, quote unquote, your own painting?
This will be my own painting.
It will be, yeah.
100%. That's the point.
So you totally absorbed, yeah.
Yeah, this is my own painting. This is the painting that I do. This. I mean, listen, I everything's my own painting, right? But this is the stuff that gets me going. Okay, this is when there's a reason for it beyond the aesthetic, I suppose.
That's really interesting. So, but also that project-based thing, that kind of structure.
Exactly.
You get up for, and you
exactly.
have, yeah.
So I don't like the whole sort of the nebulous nature of how things have been over the last few years. It's been not structured enough, and I need that. I really feel happier when I'm in that situation where I've got a discernible start point and I've got an end point. I know what I'm working towards. I know what I'm trying to achieve, and I will do it. Because it's motivating. It's exciting, and if it kills me, probably will, or somebody else might. Probably my wife.
I've got two questions for you. They're both. I'll ask one at a time because they're both a little bit different.
Cool.
You mentioned about trying to get funding, and I was curious if you've ever approached, the Arts Council of England, or if it's any experience with that, because I've approached the Arts Council of Wales, and it comes with its own anecdotes at times, because there can be some interesting discoveries in that process. Is there anything you can discuss with that?
Look, I don't want to go on record as to say sort of too much, I suppose, because I'm in the process of applying for another grant, right? So I don't in any way jeopardize that. But I've applied for a small grant once before from the Arts Council, and I didn't get it. And I don't for 1 minute think that there's a God-given right why I should get something, but I thought that I put in a pretty good application, and I didn't get it. And I was subsequently told that, not by them but by somebody else, that there's a very particular language that you need to speak with these applications, and you need to say certain things, and you have to be quite sort of strategic about that. And clearly, not that I had any feedback, but clearly I didn't. So I am going to be working with a bid writer, actually, who specialises in Arts Council applications, on my next application for a larger grant, which I hope will help with this project if I were to get it. So we shall see. So this is what I'm saying, is that there are a number of variables that affect, that's outcomes of which affect other outcomes. So I can't really do very much unless I get the money, basically. So there's that. There's another organisation that I'm not going to name, that I am just about to submit an application for, and what they do is they fund travel. So they fund travel of UK nationals abroad to basically discover things that they can then bring back, which are going to benefit UK culture and society. And of course, this for me falls under the remit of what I'm doing, of going out and looking at sort of case studies abroad, that the learnings from which I can bring back, disseminate here, build awareness that can benefit our society, and more importantly, our climatic future, I suppose. So again, I don't know the ins and outs of this particular application and what exactly they're looking for, but yeah, that would be good, because that would actually fund the actual travel side of things. But they won't fund the art side of things. They won't fund the dissemination of what I do, but it's the actual travel to go out and gain knowledge. But I've never done this sort of stuff before. It's always been a commercial gallery, sell work. That's how it's monetized. Whereas this, if I get the money to do it, and we're not talking large amounts of money, but we're talking enough to facilitate the project, to keep me, from wasting away, whilst also being able to actually go and, do the groundwork and do the work. Yeah, that's the idea, basically.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the other question's a little bit different, so I wanted to make sure I didn't ask both at the same time, because they don't really relate. Very loosely they do, I suppose. Because of the first conversation I had with you, we discussed briefly sketchbooks and how you don't use sketchbooks really, you work things out on the canvas.
Yeah.
And with this project that you're working towards, it makes me curious as whether you use a notebook or is there any way that you don't do that? I mean,
no, I don't. I just use my camera.
So even when you're pitching and proposing and discussing with people, you don't use visual aids or kind of say, or I suppose it's just it's the way that I communicate quite often.
The pitch and the proposals to organisations.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about the application for funding. That's a different thing. But for collaborators or partners, be they charities or climate change advocacy groups, or whatever it is, their language is not a visual one normally. So quite frankly, if you show them a picture in a sketchbook that you've done, they're not going to really care about that. What they want to know is, are you a risk, and are you of benefit to them? Is there a symbiosis there where you can bring bring currency to what they do, as well as obviously me benefiting from what they do. So the way that I pitch that is you very rarely get to speak to people, so it's nearly always from a computer, very, very well constructed emails with hyperlinks to past projects that they can, you make it easy for them, undeniable. You can't say no. You just click on that, bang, all the info's up there, bang, that's me, super quick. And say, this is what you're going to do. You spell it out. This is what you want to do. This is why you want to work with them. How's it going to benefit them? Blah, blah, blah. And I know I'm sounding a little bit sort of cynical about it, but, that's how the world tends to work. And once because they're taking a punt on you, they don't know you from Adam, right? The fact that I'm the Royal Society of, or Institute of Oil Painters president, they don't care. They didn't even know there was one, right? So that doesn't matter. It's getting them interested, and then you can have a conversation, and then you can meet them, and then you can sit down with them, then you can show them what you do. They're like, oh, that's all right. You're actually, you can paint a picture. Like, yes. And that's how you build up these things. And you know what, Simon, a lot of it is disappointment, because there's not a huge amount of what I consider to be sort of blue sky thinking at play. across the board. It takes particular types of people within organizations to sort of see the potential in these sorts of collaborations. I think that the corporate side of things and the certainly the charitable sector is beginning, I think, to see the benefits of cross-pollination with the visual arts, and how the visual arts is a very powerful platform for disseminating their messages as well. And I'm trying to sort of, I suppose, exploit that to a certain degree, because obviously having the backing or the association with one of these organizations helps me personally enormously as well. It not only facilitates the project, and to introduce me to the right people to get sort of the issues that I want to, but also the dissemination it's got a much greater reach as well.
So it's mutually beneficial in that sense. But you've got to sort of
spell that out there.
Yeah, speak their language first to get
to let them know how beneficial it is to them.
Yes,
cringeworthy, because you're like, I feel like it's like an elevator pitch, but you have to do it.
But once you get that freedom within the project, that's where what I do comes into play. That's where I can actually bring value, I suppose. But the caveat to all of this is that none of what I've just talked about is actually signed off. I'm still in the sort of, I had it almost signed off before with a different partner, but that fell through, unfortunately, which was very, very disappointing. But I think the writing was slightly on the wall, because there had been a lot of radio silence for quite a lot of time, and that's never a good sign, even though they'd actually basically said yes, and then it was God knows what happened. But I won't surmise. But out of that comes a new opportunity, and potentially something that's more more appropriate, really. So we'll see. Well, maybe the right person will watch this and listen to this and think,
who knows? I mean, absolutely. Who knows? Yeah,
good. Should we talk about painting itself then, and what you do? And I love your work, and I love the texture. It's a massive part of it. So have you always painted in an impasto way? Did you work it out as you went along? Because the figurative stuff in particular, it's absolutely accurate, but you've managed to do what many people can't do, and that is to make it accurate but also make it free, painterly, loose. It's that lovely balance right in between the two. How long did it take to develop that? And
well, look, thank you very much for that. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. And that is what I endeavor to do, I suppose. Firstly, I think I should say that I did go to art school, but I didn't, and I think I've touched on this with Simon and probably in the last session, but I didn't really learn the ins and outs of painting at art school. No. Quite opposite. They tried to sort of discourage it, really, truth be told. So I would say that I'm pretty much self-taught, and it's just hours, days, weeks, months, years of just bashing away, basically. The old practice makes perfect adage. Definitely not perfect, but practice has helped. And so I think that stylistically, I've always worked in a very similar way. I quantify the world around me, I suppose, in the same terms visually that I always have had, ever since I was much younger. And that involves, thick paint, pretty loose, but and very chaotic, I suppose. And that's sort of a chaos within the work that I'm actually actively seeking. I want that. It's really important. I don't want anything that's prescriptive, but predicated on precision, and draftsmanship, and those are the building blocks, right? It's good draftsmanship, and that just comes from sort of just absolute visual scrutiny, and just really, really harder than you think you need to, and just hoping to dear God that what you see and what it then does to your hand and your brush is sort of compatible. And then, so I want to be on that knife edge as a painter, between, that precipice between, I suppose, representational and abstract. that's the place that I like. That's the place that I find energizing and exciting as a painter.
Interesting. I often talk about this, and it's something that's always informed mine. It's this idea of both chaos and order, of Nietzsche's idea of Apollo, Dionysus. So Dionysus, the god of chaos, poetry, intoxication. Apollo, the god of order. Too much of one, too much Dionysus, it's absolute crazy mess. Too much order, it's anal, conservative, too structured. Nietzsche's idea is like good art is a real perfect balance between these two, that you have the structure, the kind of architecture of Apollo, but then within that, the dynamism and, in your case, painterliness of the kind of Dionysus, this spirit, this sort of visual poetry.
Yeah.
It's very hard to create.
Yeah, I think, I do think it is. I think it is difficult because the two are not mutually exclusive, and they, in essence, they are contradictory. One is fighting with the other, and to have some sort of an accord, some sort of truce between the two is not easy to attain or to broker as a painter. And sometimes it happens more effectively than others. Sometimes it's too prescriptive and just lacks that organic thrust. And sometimes it just goes too far the other way. It's like Alan Partridge, but you know what I mean. It just becomes too chaotic to the point where the actual craft of it has gone. And for me, that's not where I want to be. And I'm not saying it's not what I wouldn't want in a few years' time. We all change. I think that historically, certainly artistically, historically, there's been a bias towards a move to abstraction throughout a painting journey. But I don't know. I think, would I consider myself more abstract now than I used to be? Yeah, possibly slightly. That's in a small amount, I think. Slightly more chaotic, deliberately.
Deliberately. Do you know that point in the painting when you hit that balance right? Are you aware of that as it's happening? You say, don't push it any further.
Yeah, and I can't describe that. It's just a feeling. It's just that's so uselessly unhelpful for your viewers right now, because I can't articulate that. But I suspect it's different for everybody, and it's different for every process. But for me, I just get that feeling. It's like, right, okay, that is what I need, what I want. But then there's also a little voice in the back of my head saying, yes, but you need to evolve as a painter. So perhaps you need to step into that beyond and push it. And perhaps you need to mess it up, or for it to be a little bit more ordered or a little bit more worked. I think that's criticism that I would level at myself historically, is things perhaps being a little bit underworked, perhaps not as nuanced as they could be. And I think that that's something that I have been working on, just to make things not in any way more finished or polished, but more nuanced. And I mean nuanced in terms of, the aggregate marks that link areas, the sublimation, the what's the word I'm looking for? There's a particular word where you change from one.
Liminal?
Sorry?
It's not liminal, is it? It's not that.
It's actually not liminal, but that's
it's in between.
That's also a good one, but it's that sort of thing, right? Where I'm just trying to, but whilst retaining a freshness, and so taking risks, and sometimes doing what they did at art school, which was to destroy stuff for the sake of it, so that you can just see what that feels like. So never being static, I suppose. Modulation, tonal modulation. That's it. I'm not
with paintings, so I've had this past week, and I don't know what it is, like a few days of not quite being able to do what I normally do. And I tried to work it out. Is it because I've got a lot on my mind, or is it about the practice? Is it about the patience? What is it that sometimes I can just walk in, have flow? Other times it's again. How do you navigate that and deal with it?
We don't. Different for different people, right? It's all one's own experience, and that's what happens with me is not what happens with you or what happens with someone. everybody else watching this. And you can't predict it either. So, at least I can't. I can go into the studio feeling brilliant, energized, like this is going to be an absolute belter, and it's just rubbish. Conversely, I can go in feeling like crap, and something can happen, and I still don't know what the outcome's going to be. And you know what? Thank God for that. I'm glad that I don't know, because that's the alchemy of it, isn't it? That's the mystery, and I think that is a seductive thing, and that keeps me hungry.
That's interesting. I think as well with it, and I was explaining this to someone else the other day. I look out my window a lot whilst I'm painting. I pace around. I go for a walk around the block. It looks like procrastination, but I'm still sort of thinking about painting. And I think being a full-time painter, it's that thing that it is not like many other things. If I'm going in to do my accounts, for example, I get reluctantly sit down. I'm not very good at doing, by the way, but I'd sit down, and then you've got this kind of linear thing that you've got to do.
At least you've got some accounts, Simon. Sorry, at least you've got some accounts. Good.
I suppose. But it's one of it, and I often think about this, that painting, you kind of to hit that absolute flow is a rare thing. I'm doing a couple of commissions at the moment. I'm finding them really difficult because, first of all, in many ways, it's other people's sort of vision. I'm a kind of a painter that gets the inspiration and then paints, but when I'm doing it in this development, I find it very difficult. And maybe that's affected my other painting. I don't know why I've been feeling strange.
I think that's highly likely, and I think I would qualify what I just said before by saying, I didn't know why. It depends what you're painting. So if I know what I'm going to paint, and the thought of it gives me that little buzz, that feeling, invariably the outcome is going to reflect that. If I feel very indifferent to something that I feel duty bound to paint, then it's hard for that to be anything other than just a response to that feeling, really. There are things that I get excited about painting and things that I do not get excited about painting. And I take your point about commissions. Even with the best will in the world, even if you really get on with the person who you're painting, it's still you and you do have agency over it to a certain degree. It's still not your choice. It's still not your vision and what you would automatically paint, unless by some quirk of fate that person is exactly what it is.
Alignment.
Yeah, just total alignment, which just, let's be honest, doesn't really happen very often.
No.
What I choose to paint in terms of portraits, in terms of the non-commissioned stuff, is quite specific. It's generally a little bit challenging and irregular and not what society would consider to be pretty or good looking. That irregularity for me is one of the things that I find exciting. I can see it. I can see a person as a painting. I can't say what it's going to look like as the painting because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I just feel it. I'm like, wow, that is something that somebody that just needs to be painted, and I think I can do that. Whereas conversely, something else is just like, wow, your face is very regular.
Yeah, and then you sort of can't push it towards being irregular.
Exactly, and it's not. I don't feel pigeonholed per se by the process of the commission or the person's, how they feel about it. I mean, obviously I want them to like it, but I am not overly preoccupied about, flattering them or whether or not they're going to, like the angle of their nose or whatever. At the end of the day, there's a prerequisite with what I do that it's going to be accurate. Okay. I wouldn't let something get to the pass that it's not, as I said, predicated on, pretty rigorous observation. It'll just be them, but perhaps slightly more them than they are. I've said this to Simon before, more than they are in reality. So I'm not hugely fussed about whether or not they like it or not. It's whether they respect it, I suppose, as a painter. I think that's more important to me. And what I really struggle with in those situations is then to bring peril into the process, the degree of peril and risk taking that I would do for my own private stuff, because I'm just not as inspired by it. That's right. And it's not because I'm worried about, where the pen will take me in terms of the painting and whether it's going to sort of stop looking like them. It's just I'm not as inspired inherently, so I won't be as energized to make those sorts of chaotic, sort of almost suicidal decisions, which I think are very important in painting, to push you through and broach new ground.
Do you think that as well is that, I find with my own painting in that sense, my target audience is myself. I want to create a better painting than the last 50 I've created. Whereas and if people can relate to that, and as artists we develop that kind of good sense, in a sense, if I as the artist can see, actually this is a good one I've created here, other people tend to sort of relate to that. I think with the commission aspect as well is that your target audience is not yourself within it. Both sort of financially, practically, but I think also on the level that you're talking about that relating to it. And I think what happens then is, if I'm trying to perform for myself by creating a painting, I am the ultimate sort of judge of that, and I will really scrutinise it, but I will also accept it. I think when it's a commission, I do get that thing of thinking, but I hope they like it. I want to make it right for them, which is true, and it's right because they're paying you to do it. But I do think there's a massive difference, and I've got a couple on the go at the moment, but I've just said after this, I'm taking it off my website. I just need a break to focus on my own stuff. And I do find that thing interesting again, like you were saying about your own inspiration. Within that, you are the kind of a judge, and I think it's really important sometimes to understand and to know those differences and to see it, inside yourself, how, you are as an artist in different situations.
Absolutely. No, I can't really elaborate on that, Richard, because I think you've put it, succinctly and eloquently. I think my experience is very similar. I that echoes with me as well.
Cool. So,
yeah, I almost hesitate to bring this up, but I wanted to ask your view because I have this friend and she is a very good artist for using color, and she has what I describe to her as two branches to her output. And I was a bit hesitant to do this, but I reluctantly did advise her to nurture one side more than the other, because I have an opinion where it doesn't matter how well someone produces artwork, if it's based on celebrity or film, I think it's just a different category than your own observation and study of your own personal experience. So I was advising her to maybe separate her movie studies from her own personal life production and kind of the work where she's painted just a bed, but it's the way that she's done the quilt was just beautiful use of color. And she'll do flowers and they're almost abstract because they're such heavily saturated with this kind of brightness that she captures. I don't know if I'm wrong to tell her that. I tried to advise her on my specific view and experience. Do you have any kind of advice that you ever give to artists on this is a more commercial market with movie and celebrity, and it might taint the view of your career or output if you combine that with work which could be seen as more academic or personal? Am I way off, or do you share any of that view or have a view on that at all?
Who's that a question to?
Oh, to you, yeah, to you too.
Okay. Damn it. Oh God! Wow, that's really difficult. I mean, I haven't actually experienced an individual who has worked like that within my own experience. I've seen it, I've seen it on Instagram a lot. My initial sort of I suppose, instinctive, visceral response is that it's not a very good idea. And then I'm trying to think through that and work backwards and try and sort of articulate in my mind as to why isn't it a good idea. I think for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, the art community or the painting community in particular would or could, look down slightly on that dual thread and the whole sort of painting of celebrity, sort of wham bam ishness. The other thing that I would think about with that is that it's actually not, it's not your own image. And I think that for me is the main issue. Is it's not, it doesn't matter you're painting a celebrity. You can paint whoever you want. That's your choice. I mean, I've painted celebrities. I hate that word, by the way. Celebrities.
Yeah.
But it's been from, having met them. Do you know what I mean? And so it's my lens, it's my interpretation of them. Whereas obviously, if you're working from somebody else's content, it's their interpretation of them, and there's no real connection, I think, between the artist and the outcome, other than you have applied the paint yourself. I mean, obviously, how you work a photograph, and that brings it to it's a different debate about working from photos, which, by the way, I've got no problem with, if it's done in the right way, what I consider to be the right way. But it's when you're working for somebody else's photo, they don't know about it. I think it lacks a little bit of integrity, personally, and I think that's a word that I don't like to use. And I think it can be a bit harsh. I don't want your friend to sort of see this and think, God, this guy's.
She'll love this when I send this to her.
I just don't. I do think it, from an outside perspective, an outside viewpoint, could be detrimental to your brand, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So I'm trying to.
It's interesting you're saying that, because I mean, for every you think of a picture of Marilyn Monroe, I mean, that's probably been painted tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, because these images have become part of a collective culture. And I mean, obviously Warhol, is part of the dawning of that. But I think from my experience of looking at Instagram, but also teaching art and working with different artists, I always think like individual style and brand, for lack of a better term, is definitely the way to go. And there's a massive risk in that. Yeah, you're probably going to get more engagement and likes if you're posting paintings of said celebrities, but it's worth taking that risk within your own style and your own content and building yourself up from there. Just that's the way I kind of see it, in that sense of, that it may be safe in a way to do that, and you may be really good at it, but take that risk.
Yeah, I think it's also how it makes you feel as an individual. If this friend of yours really just loves doing it, then that's one thing, isn't it? But if they feel that perhaps it's sort of not life affirming, particularly or artistically affirming, then that would, I think, validate them trying something slightly different. I also think, just generally, it doesn't matter what you're doing as an artist, but I think having a sort of dual strand of anything, it sort of it dilutes perhaps not only other people's perception of what you are as an artist, but perhaps your own output. I think it could, in theory, it could sort of diminish the intensity of one if you're channeling divergent, the channels diverge into two different either styles or strands. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, again, using my own experience, for want of a better word, I paint in the same way, whatever it is I'm painting, whether it's a fish or a tree or a person, doesn't matter. It's the same way. So hopefully you'd be able to, somebody would be able to say, oh yeah, that's that bloke, no matter what it is that he's painted. And I just think that that's probably in the long run a little bit more useful.
Yeah.
If people want to know what you're about, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I couldn't do anything else. So
yeah, but it's that identification through visual language, through mark making, and again back to the social media thing. Our bandwidth for seeing all of the nuances of someone's different techniques and style isn't there, and I think Instagram has definitely sort of influenced artists in a way. I mean, if you look back, a lot of 20th century artists, they would do sort of still lives, they would do portraiture, they would do landscape. I mean, the whole thing. What I've seen now more is a narrowing in of, and I'm guilty of this myself. Well, not guilty, it's part of what I do, but it's a narrowing in because there's a recognisability within it, whether it's in the brushstrokes or the subject or the colours or stuff like that. So it's that visual language, like Tim's visual language. You look at his painting and you know who it's by, dependent of subject matter. I love, by the way, that London November painting.
Thank you. That's I've had a good day. That sold today. So
did it? Great, fabulous.
Yeah,
great take.
Thank you. Yeah, I was happy with that one actually.
Did you paint that plein air?
Well, I painted it from my studio window.
Yeah.
And I just completely sort of simplified the skyline, so just like donk.
Yeah.
I didn't think that people really needed to see wood green in that photo. In that
well. Are you in wood green?
Yeah. Well, I live in Bounds Green in North London.
Okay. Yeah.
It's in wood green. Yeah.
Yeah. I moved to Norfolk from London, and I lived on the ladder.
Did you?
Finsbury Park for many years. So,
up the road.
Yeah, you know where you are. So, talking about the landscape, is there any particular landscape you like or inspired by? How do you work? Do you work plein air? Do you work from photos?
Yeah.
What's your process?
Sometimes both. Sometimes I was going to say sometimes neither. Definitely not neither. I definitely either work from one or the other. Sometimes both. It depends really on the size. So generally, the small ones are, generally plein air, sort of, yay big boards, that sort of stuff. I really like Norfolk. The sort of those stark horizontals, and then the occasional vertical, and then the big skies right on my strata. I like all of that, and how can I sort of abstract it? Sort of, it's not necessarily site specific. And you'll notice, I mean, you may or may not notice from a lot of the titles that I think infuriate a lot of people. They are not site specific titles. It's not, this is blah de blah. This is just this like Norfolk River or London Sky or whatever. Because I don't want people to get too bound up in the sort of the nostalgia of I went there as a child, therefore I like that painting. I want more objective about whether or not they actually like the bloody painting or not whether they had their first kiss there or whatever. So there's that. But sometimes I'll work from photos, and I think, and with portraits as well, sometimes from photos, and that that plays into the whole topic of working from photography. And I've been very vocal about this in the past about saying absolutely no problem with that from my point of view at all. It's obviously how you interpret. It's your interpretive abilities determine the outcome, and if you can apply the same interpretive skills to a photograph that you would a person sitting in front of you, or a tree in a real landscape, and distill that information and then disseminate it in the way you disseminate, rather than feeling that you've just got to sort of paint every last little detail because it's captured stillness and it's there in front of you.
Because it wouldn't do. I was teaching this morning, so I run little painter classes and workshops, and I was sort of talking about the anatomy of clouds, about tonal value and all of that stuff. But I took in on my iPad a load of Constable cloud studies.
And
and
aren't
we
they
looked.
brilliant? Those studies. Oh, mate.
Just,
Honestly, I mean, for me, they're
yeah. They,
literally
and
stratospheric.
yeah. I mean, incredible. And his they changed me in many ways. Wanted me to become a painter. His oil sketches and his cloud studies. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, Constable was all about, the Hay Wain, which was on
Yeah.
my nan's biscuit tin or whatever. So it was that kind of more rebellious nature. But I took these in, and I'll often do this is we look through the photos, and the instinct is for a lot of them to want to copy exactly what the photo is doing, and especially from a painting, it's almost impossible because it's layered in different ways, and the technique is different. But what I'll often do is show people and then turn it off and say, remember the basics of that picture in your mind. And you can often remember the compositional elements, some of the tonal elements, and then try and riff off of that with the painterly language. But I fully believe in photography. I don't personally work from it myself. If I do use it, I will usually just look at a photograph, often of a sky or something, for about 5 minutes, and then turn it off and get rid of it, put it way out of sight.
Well, that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose my version of that is to work from like a bad photograph. I prefer
Yeah.
I prefer to work from something that doesn't have a huge amount of information or is a bit blurred, ambiguous, where I'm having to, sort of fill in the mental blanks, and that brings that sort of escalates my interpretive, the necessity for me to interpret what's in front of me. Yeah, and the same is true of portraits as well. If I have to work with a photograph, then I don't. There are certain photos I look at and think, yeah, I can't see that as a painting because it's just too. I don't know. There's just too much there. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's hard to describe, but you do need to be very selective about what it is that you paint, and you can't really tell people what to do. That's their choice.
Yeah.
As certainly as a teacher, that's their choice and how they do that. And you can then sort of offer advice once that's down, and then say, well, had you considered doing this? But we all see things differently, and thank God for that.
Yeah, and some people do. I'm not really an observational painter. It's funny. I observe a lot, but I'm not what would you say, direct observational painter. It's more sort of memory based. I spend a lot of time walking out, watching the sunset, looking at the clouds, that kind of thing, and then come back to the studio.
And that's just so far removed from my process. It's like I wouldn't have the ability to do that.
Yeah,
I could not do that. There's just I just don't work like that. I am a painter in my own right, But yeah, and I've always thought that that's a tremendous skill to be able to do that, to be able to sort of commit, not in terms of photographically to memory, because that's definitely not what you're doing, but to take your inspiration, for it to give you enough information for you then to sort of disseminate it in a painterly your own back. I think that's great. Yeah.
I mean, the danger of it is that I become stylistic in that sense. So things I remember. This is how I paint a cloud. This is those kind of things. Yeah. But what I tend to do, I mean, most of my paintings are based on a very similar composition. I'm in East Anglia. I'm in Norfolk. I grew up in the Fens. I know the horizon and the sky and the sea and the shore. That's my kind of a reference point. And once you have that basic composition, it's one of the easiest compositions, say a seascape or a landscape, because you're just dealing with horizontals and throw a few verticals and diagonals. Now, when I do paint, for me, it's all about the atmosphere, and often the format I'm using is, I've painted the same painting many times, but I'm always switching the colours around, the atmosphere around, just to pitch it on that level. So when I was talking about that indirect observation, it's all of those little nuances in light and that particular atmosphere at that time, which is then being translated into the work. Let's talk about colour. So talking about, I often use a triad, a primary triad of colours. So, and I'll switch it around. So sometimes it'll be raw sienna, quinacridone red, ultramarine blue, and white. And then next time I'll choose cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, and Payne's grey. So it's this constant like switching around. How do you approach colour? Do you have a set palette, or do you change around?
I have a set palette which has changed over time. It's sort of it's evolved and devolved and then re-evolved, I suppose, again over time. And I have at the moment I have 7 colours on my palette which I use, and those are in no order at all. Lemon yellow, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, titanium white, and cobalt or cerulean blue. For me, those two are interchangeable. It used to be fewer. I used to not have the cobalt or cerulean blue on there. I didn't also have the alizarin crimson. But I find that those colours, they're always on my palette. And I'm not saying I'll use every one of those every time in every painting, but they're always on my palette. And I can mix. Sorry?
There if you need them.
Exactly. And I find that I can mix, most things from those. I'm not a closed book. It could well change. But that's where I am at the moment. That's where I've been for a few years. Yeah.
It's always interesting, that evolution of colour and colour palettes. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that when I first got really interested in painting, go to Atlantis Art used to be in where was it, Brick Lane before, and go and thought that I'd had to buy like every tube of Old Holland oil paint to be a proper painter, and then started sort of collecting these. Never was reading online about limited palettes, and I learned more about painting, and that's how I teach now, with the limited palette, about tone, about colour, about all of that kind of stuff, just from limiting it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, an academic painter. But I think that's born out of my art school experience. I didn't do the sort of the atelier style. These are the pigments that go into these paints, and so the history of the pigments and blah blah blah. Didn't do that. It's very much sort of a trial and error thing of just, that works, that doesn't really work, and just building it up from there. And so these are just the colours that happen, I think, to help me to solve the most problems with the fewest variables, I suppose, to keep things simple, which is always a sort of the mantra, I suppose, that I try to take into my work generally, is simplicity. And how am I physically going to do that? So the use of colour, the fewer colours I have available to me to create the most options, I think will hopefully make me understand colour. Do you ever understand it? Whatever understanding means, but to be better at it. And then the application, which is normally just done with one brush for any painting. Simple, basically. Try to keep it simple so that I'm not worrying or thinking too much about the actual materials that I'm using and where I am with them, but rather just the actual process of looking and then applying and making judgments, I suppose.
So one brush, did you say?
Pretty much, yeah.
Is it a flat brush or a round? Which
is it?
What brush is it? Yeah, which shape do you go for?
So it would be relatively flat. So yoink. Or a slight, what I call filbert, which is just slightly rounded, never a pointed one, because that gives me big marks. And I don't know what size it is, because I never understood the sizing of brushes. I never really looked at it, but I can talk about how wide they are. So if, for example, I were to do I tend to work in inches actually for painting, nothing else. But if I were to do, say, a 10-inch high painting, the brush might be an inch wide or whatever. And then if I were to do a 50-inch high painting, the brush would be 5 inches. So I try and retain that ratio, so it goes up and down according to the size. And if you were to take a photograph of a large painting of mine and a small painting, chop away the context, the human scale, put them next to each other, hopefully you wouldn't be able to really know or discern which was small, because the mark making would be relatively consistent. But of course, getting the amount of paint on that bigger brush to replicate that is exponentially difficult, but doable. And that's something that I'm always looking for in my own work, is how am I going to really slap it on and keep it just under control on a larger scale.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's just something about that, putting the paint out onto the palette. If you're doing a big painting, you can just squeeze out.
Everything is exponentially physical. Just everything goes up in terms of magnitude. The amount of paint, the amount of whatever you use, thinner, the size of your palette, and the amount of energy and concentration and getting up and getting back from your painting, because it's so bloody massive, you can't sit away from the screen. So, it's not necessarily 10 times the amount of work. It's much. It can be more than that. But there is the challenge, right? And these are the challenges that I find exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
With the palette that you just discussed, I'm just wondering whether that is ever needing to shift at all when you paint in different countries or things like that. Like, have you ever needed to kind of say, I work with this palette, but this has a certain range, and now I'm considering a different landscape or a different time, or
I have worked. I generally do my painting in the UK. So if I'm doing one of these big projects abroad, it's, as I've already alluded to, it's a research trip. I will take a photograph, literally just a photo on my phone of that person, do an audio interview, and then back to the studio and interpret the photo, play the audio interview in the background, takes me back into the moment. So I'm producing the work here. I have worked abroad, obviously, with this palette, and it seems to be all right. I've never really thought about that, actually, Simon, but something I shall do. But no, I think so far it has facilitated me to work in different sort of lighting environments with different visual stimuli.
Yeah,
and you can get, out of that palette, a range of mixes and colours. It's just exponential.
I think I can. Look, at the end of the day, we're all working, ploughing our own individual little furrows, aren't we? And we're not doing sort of quantitative testing of our process next to other artists. We're not in a big warehouse saying, well, my palette can do this, yours can't do that. My palette's bigger than yours. But it may very well be that I'm sure that there's a deficit in a certain area that I don't know about, or that a colour that somebody else uses is more apposite for a certain job than what I'm doing. But that's not the real world, is it? And at the moment, for my own sensibilities and the way I read the information around me, what I have on my palette allows me to do that, I think. Yeah.
Always oil paint? Any other mediums?
It's always oil, yeah. I'm hamstrung by oil, unfortunately. I rather like it, and I don't think that I have the bandwidth to try anything else at the moment. Do you know what I mean? It's like diluting the practice. I feel that it would sort of, kind of potentially dilute me a little bit. I'm sure it would enrich me as well, actually, and probably take me off in a different direction. But at the moment, I'm very preoccupied with oil paint.
It's interesting. I paint oil and gouache. They're my main things. But I bought some casein the other day, which is milk-based paint, very old paint. And I went into Norwich Art Shop and I bought it, and I'd read it's similar to gouache, and I've been basically learning how to use gouache for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I bought this casein, and I thought I'm just going to go straight in but I realised I'd probably have to spend another year and a half, 2 years learning that.
So you've opened a can of worms, and you're like, oh God, really? Do I have to do
it? Exactly. It's very funny with gouache, because I picked it up as just a secondary medium, because I didn't have a studio at the time and was sitting indoors a lot. So I thought I'd use it, and I always liked the colour of it. And it's funny, since I've been using that, I've become more successful in many ways as an artist. And a lot of my teaching opportunities have come from gouache, because it's not a regular medium. So, and I kind of use it like I'm using oil paint. So it's that unique thing. But I opened this casing up, and it went well to start with the first painting, and it's started to realise the limitations of the medium, and I'm regretting it now. It's like you sort of balancing two things in one, an oil crack, and you put another on there. Just
it's like you've opened a Pandora's box, and it's like you've got to see it through, but you don't want it. And also, it's probably gone off by now, hasn't it? It's milk.
Yeah, but it smells weird. It's a very. It's by was it Sheba Richardson? But it smells not like milk. It smells like kind of polish. It's very weird. Very weird. Okay. Yeah, but I'll persevere a little bit until
you report back.
Yeah, well,
good. I mean, good on you for you for doing it. You're a braver man than I am. Yeah. So no,
But your style, you see that impasto, that brushwork. I mean, there's no other medium. I mean, people say, have you tried acrylic? But no, you cannot get those effects that you're getting with any other medium.
I mean, I haven't painted with acrylic for a very, very long time. I did art school and before that. And, I would paint relatively thickly with it, but it didn't allow me the sort of plasticity. It just wasn't there in quite the same way. Once it dries, obviously it dries very quickly. So, which, I've got to say, I don't mind because I work very quickly. So in a way that would force my hand. So it's not bad. But I just think the finish on it just ends up without quite the same luster, without quite the same vitality, I suppose.
I always think it's like, because I experimented with acrylic too in the past, and I was sort of like, you've got original Coca-Cola, full of sugar, that's oil, and then you've got Diet Coke, right, which is kind of tastes similar, but it just has a sort of emptier taste to it. And I always think like oil is the juiciest.
What's Coke Zero then?
Oh God, a casein. But I think with you've taken oil and you've mastered it. It's your medium.
Well, I mean, I take issue with you saying I've mastered it.
As much as we can master it.
But I've used it exclusively, and I think I'm probably slightly hamstrung by it because I struggle to do anything else. But I think the point is I still see the potential in it. I still feel the excitement from it, and I think that once I don't, if that happens, then that's time to look elsewhere and to try something different. But at the moment, I'm not going to do that just for the sake of it, because I'm still very, as I say, very absorbed with it, and all of its foibles and all of its pitfalls and opportunities.
Good, cool.
This episode will go up on Wednesday the 15th. So, is there anything that you have coming up that is worth telling the audience about, any kind of exhibitions or anywhere you'd like people to go to support you and help income?
Simon, I really wish I could say that, that I have a lot of exhibitions coming up, etc. But, obviously in trying to build this project, that's taking my focus, and I'm not really sort of doing much other exhibitions. I mean, that's not entirely true. I've got work in the Royal Institute of Oil Painters annual exhibition at the Mall Galleries, which starts at the end of this month and runs through till mid-December. I've got a couple of pieces in that. But that aside, no, I haven't actually. And no, I haven't. Sorry, I haven't. Because I normally have around this time of year, but it's almost sort of like I'd be quite blinkered about what I'm doing. One thing I will mention, which is not actually, an exhibition at all, but I'm going on a work trip to China. In the very beginning of January, I've been invited as a sort of cultural arts person, to go out and divest my knowledge to arts institutions in Beijing, and the art school system there, and to go to galleries and sort of, I suppose, build collaborative ties arts-wise with Beijing, with Chinese institutions, and that's really good because actually there's a hell of a lot of really, really good painting going on in both places like China and, you know, places like Russia, actually, you know, Repin Academy in St. Petersburg or in Moscow, I can't remember. But, you know, is it? Yeah, I mean, it's like fantastic, and it's the same with Beijing. The principles of really good painting, and they're very keen to sort of build build their knowledge, I suppose, of what's happening in the UK and Europe, especially, and the UK especially. So that's going to be it's just a week's trip, and I'm taking my young family with me.
Fantastic!
It's going to be great. It's going to be freezing though, because we've got -15. Beijing in the winter is no joke, but yeah, it should be really, really interesting. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the beginning of January, but no actual exhibitions. But
fair enough. Well, for say the online audience then, because we'll have international viewers, where can they support you and look at your work in order to make a purchase and view your work?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think so. This is something I did last year. Was to actually turn my website into a selling platform, which I hadn't done before, and it's now, you know, it's live, and there's a selling facility on there. So you just go to the shop page on my website at www.timbenson.co.uk, and it's subdivided into categories. So people, places, still lifes, that sort of thing, and yeah, certain works are for sale on there. So if you are interested, then that's, I think, the you know, the most direct way of doing things, and you sort of cut out the middleman, as it were, in galleries. And by the way, just for transparency's sake, it doesn't matter where you buy my work; the price is the same whether it's a gallery or on my website. You don't get a special deal on my website. You know, it is what it is. But
you get more.
If you want 100%, if you want the artist to get the money. Yeah. That's the best way to do it. So
excellent. And they should visit your Instagram otherwise, because you have a great.
And yeah, my Instagram at Tim Benson Art, and that's the same on X. Sorry, Twitter. Sorry, X. Yeah, those are good ways.
Are you on Threads?
I am on Threads by virtue of me being on Instagram, and I'm still quite sure what the point of Threads is, but yeah, so I'm on it. Whatever that means. So these are ways of connecting and seeing work. Yeah.
Well, the links for all that will be in the description of this video. So I encourage everyone to go and check out your platforms.
And then obviously the longer game, the sort of hopefully the big sort of exhibition or events surrounding the project, as and when, that will be something to keep an eye on as well. And
we'll have to get you back on.
Yeah, well, that will be something to talk about, because there should be a lot of interesting things happening there. So yeah,
fantastic.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, incredibly generous with your time. Thank you.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. It's always lovely to meet you, Richard, and obviously really nice to see you again, Simon. It's always nice talking with you. So yeah, good luck with it all. I think it's fantastic, and good luck with the future. The future guests, and very, 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 very big thank you to everybody.
Thank you.